right now we're excited to welcome Trish Barillas, who is a renowned speaker and author with over a decade of experience in relationship, anxiety, and job coaching. She's the author of A Face of Anxiety and has personal experience with generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder. As a coach, she helps clients overcome their own anxiety by deconstructing triggers and building anxiety toolkits to foster healthier responses. She's also the founder of a nonprofit and runs a family farm in Guatemala. Welcome, Trish. It is such an honor to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Anxiety is, one of the most common experiences on ShareWell and perhaps globally. And so we're really excited to tap into your insights and your expertise on the topic. I'd love to just start with learning, how did you come into this line of work of helping others overcome their anxiety?
So it's interesting because when I grew up, we had a library and you had to go check out books. Like we didn't have Google or Instagram. So there wasn't a wealth of knowledge, nor were there conversations. I also come from a family of immigrants. So mental health was just never something we spoke about. And it was something that you just dealt with. So as I was growing up, I really suffered and I knew I was different. I just didn't understand why or what it was. So I didn't get a proper diagnosis until I was about 19. And then I didn't get my proper really care and or therapy / tools until I was about 37. So it was a long process. So when you don't understand something, that's usually why people study it so often. So because I needed to figure out what was happening within myself, then I was absorbed in psychology, anything with the brain, human behavior. So I knew I was always going to be in psychology in some manner. I just didn't realize it was going to be coaching. So when I went to a life coach myself, when I was about 32, I realized that that was the exact job that I was looking for. And I was on my way to become a clinical psychologist, but I decided that coaching was it called to me, and I just knew that I wanted that space. And anxiety isn't something that coaches really coach on. It's based off of not just education, but also my own personal experience, which I'm allowed to share as a coach, which is why coaching resonated, because I'm able to share more about my personal life, because we don't have like an ethic code the way that therapists or psychiatrists do.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I also suffer from anxiety and always have. And in just hearing you speak, I realized I've never thought about getting a coach for it. And actually, that would be really helpful because I now understand where it's coming from, but I don't think I really have a great toolkit to overcome it. Um, Along those lines, what are some of your techniques or strategies, maybe some of the most common ones that you find really resonate with your clients and helping them deal with their day-to-day anxiety?
So with anxiety, and there's healthy anxiety and then there's dysfunctional anxiety. So the healthy anxiety is where you can really trace it back to a root cause, like there's an event. So let's say you're going on an interview for a job and you're nervous and your stomach is fluttery. You might have, your heart might be racing, or you're going on a date. Like that's healthy anxiety. When it becomes dysfunctional is when it starts to interrupt your daily life. So when something really, it's almost like you are ruminating on certain things over and over and over again and can't move off of them, or the body is having a very physical reaction, that is where it becomes dysfunctional. So for my clients, I really ask them to take inventory of what's happening and when, especially for women, it's very hormonal. So we have to really track to see about our hormones, because anxiety will spike and it's different for everybody and for every woman. So taking inventory is really important when you identify as someone who's anxious. Also, figuring out what your lifestyle is, and are you living a lifestyle that is more conducive to a non-anxious than an anxious? And what I mean by that is, what do you expose yourself to? So are you watching the news or are you reading the news? Are you somebody who fixates on images and maybe that doesn't resonate for you? Are you scrolling right before bed? Because what I think people don't realize is that just because we think it doesn't affect us doesn't mean that the brain isn't attaching to certain things. So you have to be mindful about how you put yourself to sleep. You have to be mindful of how you take in information and also the people around you. So if you're in a space where you feel or know that you are more anxious than normal, you'll be more irritable, you'll have less patience, everything will start to feel like it's too much pressure. So you have to figure out, how do you navigate your lifestyle when these things come up? And what are you doing? And do you even know what your tools are? One of the best things that I really encourage people to do when they find themselves in the midst of maybe an anxiety and or panic attack is to use cold. So the cold method is anything. You could use it with ice. You could use it with a cold cloth. You can roll a washcloth and put it in the fridge and then wrap it around the back of your neck. When
Mm.
you put something cold onto your body, when we're anxious, our body temperature rises. So the brain starts to fixate on something outside of you versus what's inside of you. And then your brain will shift and be like, this is cold, or I'm uncomfortable, or whatever that is. So that helps to then try to ground yourself. Because what happens is when we're anxious, we become scared and we don't want to be scared. We're scared of being scared. Without fear, there wouldn't be anxiety. So somewhere along the way, we I guess trained, or our patterns or the way we're wired is that fear kicks in. So your fight or flight will kick in. So with the cold method, it's really trying to now regulate your system and bring you back into yourself. So cold method has always worked for me. And that's something that I really, really highly suggest for people that can have these types of responses. If you're at a restaurant, order a glass of ice and then just hold it in your hand underneath the table. The floor gets a little wet. Who cares, right? Or you go to the bathroom and you run the water, but they generally tend to be as cold. So there's options if you're not, in the comfort of your own home.
Hmm. I love that. And that's so helpful because it's easy to do, and easily accessible at any time. I will definitely keep that in mind. Um, in your experience working with clients, are there any common misconceptions about anxiety that you've come across, or misunderstandings about what anxiety is to a person?
I think the whole thing is misunderstanding, because people bring so much shame to
Mm.
anxiety, because it's people, I think, misuse the word. Oh, I'm so anxious. Oh, I just had a panic attack. And they're saying this about, like, I don't know, picking out a dress, where they're not actually having any type of attack. So I think that because we misuse the word so often, that people don't really get looked at in terms of like, oh, this is actually happening, right? And the depths of what that means. Also, when people suggest to just breathe through it, oh, just think about something else, they play it down. But when you're anxious, your reality changes. You're now in a very irrational state, and it's scary. And people that have not gone through a type of anxiety and or attack, they just think that it's their healthy anxiety, and maybe meditation and breathing might help them, but it's not going to help when it's a dysfunction.
Mm.
So I think people find a lot of shame in, like, why can't I just get through this? Why can't I just take a yoga class and breathe better, or not ruminate on things? That's not how you're wired. So I
Mm.
think the misconception is that it's a choice. Like, we don't choose this. Nobody wants this. This is brutal. And I wouldn't wish this on anyone. So the goal is, one, can you own what makes you who you are? And anxiety, it's okay to be an anxious person. It's okay to be a depressive person. It's okay to have a mental disorder, right?
Mhm.
And we don't need people to understand us. We need people to support us. And those are two very different things.
Mm. That's so well said. And on that note, is there a way for someone to be able to channel their anxiety for good or for growth?
Well, I mean, for example, myself, my anxiety led me to my career. Those of us who are anxious, we tend to be very empathic, which means that we can read people pretty well. And that's great for jobs. If you are a recruiter, if you're a hiring manager, if you're in the wellness space, if you're helping others, people who are anxious, we are like sponges and we absorb so much from everybody and we feel so much. So we're great caretakers. We're generally really well detailed because we've already thought about every worst case scenario. So you want someone who's an anxious to be on a trip with you because we generally know where the hospitals are, we know where everything might be. So there's parts of anxiety that I think are phenomenal, and it's not it's of anything that I could have. I feel like anxiety for me has been a blessing because it gave me my job, it makes me who I am. Is it hard? Yes. But I don't think anybody walks this earth without dealing or suffering from something, so I'm okay with this being what I carry.
Mm. Yeah, I really love that. And I think bringing a softness and acceptance to something, the best way is through it, right? Instead
Right.
of trying to combat it or get angry at yourself. And I certainly have done that to myself, the narrative of, oh, I'm feeling anxious, but I shouldn't feel anxious. Why am I doing that? And then it just builds and builds. That really resonates with me. In your experience as a coach, would you mind sharing maybe one story of transformation that you've seen from working with someone with anxiety?
Yeah. So one of my case studies, I had actually a very young client, and I normally don't take clients of a certain age, but during pandemic, I had parents begging me, just begging, like, we've tried everything, please. Like, I follow you, I listen to your podcasts and panels. And so I said, oh, I agreed, which I didn't want because I just think that that's some age, there's some ages that you're just not fully equipped yet. But I
Mm,
took on this case, and this young gentleman was not functioning in the world, really not functioning. And he wasn't able to get out of the ruminating thoughts, and he wasn't able to really become an adult. And he was in therapy. So I would say 85% of my clients are also in therapy at the same time. So me and his therapist really worked hard on getting him what he needed, which was the correct medication, and then getting rid of the shame, right? And getting rid of the, well, why can't I do this on my own? And why is everybody else my age thriving? XYZ. He had never held a job, and he was definitely old enough to hold a job. And his mother was afraid that he would never leave her house. He would never go into the workforce. So it took about 7 months, and he is currently at his job. He is dating. He is teaching, actually, and he is thriving. And when I don't hear from clients, I get upset, but then I realize I don't hear from them because they're doing really well. And if I hear from them, it's because they're not. So it's okay. I think that's the hard part for me because I always want to know what people are doing. But he does touch base. So he was such a great case for me because I didn't want to take it on. And I'm glad that I did, because I feel like with my help and the right support, he was able to now live a life that was worth living.
mm. That's amazing. That must be so rewarding to be able to see someone change um, and be able to have played a part in that transformation.
Yeah, I never like calling myself a life coach. I generally like to call myself a creator of positive change because that's the goal, right? I'm basically pushing, and our unified goal is for everybody to move into the positive, whether it's with anxiety or a breakup or a career change. It's we need support, and there's somebody that holds you accountable. And especially with my anxious clients, it's really nice to know that the person you've talked or talking to has walked through your hell. And when you
Mm,
know that, it kind of makes things lighter, right? And you feel seen. And I think that's what a lot of people don't get, is that they don't feel seen and they don't feel heard. And that's really important for transformation.
mm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And that makes me wonder, for those of us who have never worked with anxiety coach or a coach at all, at what point would you recommend that someone look into having a coach or specifically an anxiety coach?
With coaching, we coaches deal with present. So with therapy, you're dealing with the past.
Mm,
So therapy is really about the why, and you're going through, you know, family dynamics and certain relationships and patterns. As a coach, we're really going to the how, like how can I get to XYZ? And it's very action based. So there's homework that I give after every session, and then my clients have to be accountable. And homework generally has to do with either sending a picture of something that you said that you were going to do, creating inventory, creating a toolkit, whatever it might be. But coaching is actionable, it's in the present, it's moving you towards the future, and it's really about giving you real tools that get you moving. Whereas therapy is more so about, like, let's look at the past and let's uncover everything that may have happened, and then you move forward with your life.
mm. Yeah, that's a helpful breakdown. Um, I know I had a thought as you were speaking. There's a type of anxiety that a lot of members on ShareWell experience. It's one of our more popular sessions, and it's around social anxiety.
Hmm.
So curious, do you have any techniques or tips or insight into those of us who, yeah, just kind of feel anxious around other people?
Yes, social anxiety is very common, and sometimes it jumps, right? You might feel you have social anxiety at one point and then it might jump to health anxiety. Anxiety jumps around a lot. So with knowing that you do have social anxiety, it's about you get fixated on, what it will be, right? So you're constantly worried about, like, "Well, who am I going to talk to? What am I going to wear?" And you might fixate on some random things. But once you're there, hopefully it starts to dissipate. So what I usually encourage people is think about all the more positive things that you're going to get out of it, right? Or set it up as almost like a game where it's like, I'm going to find two people and I'm going to figure out their story, or I'm going to sit next to a person I don't know and I'm going to introduce myself. Like,
Mm,
almost really trying to set it up as like, I have an agenda. I'm not just walking in and hoping for the best, right? Because anxiety is fear of the unknown. So if you give yourself a goal and you say to yourself, this is what I'm going to challenge myself to. And if I'm in this space and I still am not feeling better or there's no relief, it's okay to leave, right? You have to do what's right for you. I think showing up is always one of the best steps, is not to avoid, but to show up and just know you're an anxious, and it's okay if you arrive somewhere as an anxious. I gave a panel to 300 people. I gave a talk in San Diego, and I had a massive panic attack the night before I spoke. I walked on that stage pretty much panicking, and I'm giving a talk about anxiety. And it was the first thing I said when I opened my mouth. I said, I had a panic attack last night. I'm in it. I'm currently in a state of severe anxiety, but we're going to do this. We're just going to do it together. I think if you call it out, it it lessens the power that it has over you. So with social anxiety, see what you can challenge yourself to, and it's okay if you get there and in 20 minutes you're like, yep, that's about as much as I can give.
that's really helpful. Um, it's funny when I have social anxiety, I always assume that everyone else doesn't. And yet I know it's common. I know a lot of people have it. Um, and yeah, it's interesting that I think a lot of us perhaps feel like we're the only ones dealing with that experience in the moment.
Of course. And there's also, you'll be surprised how many artists have severe social anxiety and they only feel like themselves on stage. I've worked with a lot of artists, and I don't know why I was so shocked. I'm like, you perform, but that's who they are authentically on a stage, but in a room, they're usually in a corner somewhere. So social anxiety is quite common. It's very common, and it's increasingly, the numbers are increasing for the younger generation more so than ever. I mean, anxiety and depression are gosh, I don't even know what those numbers are right now. Before pandemic, it was already at a discerning number, and now, I mean, we're in a mental health crisis. So yeah, I think everybody walks around thinking everyone else is okay. We're not. No, we're not. As a whole, we're not, and we're just doing the best we can.
And why do you think that for young people, anxiety is increasing?
Well, my own personal view on it is the world changed drastically, right?
Mm,
I mean, for 2 years, you couldn't leave your house. That is traumatic, even though
mm,
we feel like, oh no, we're okay, but like that wasn't okay. And just what's going on globally, uh, what people have access to, all the media, social media can be very positive, but it can be extremely negative.
mm,
There's so much comparing. Like young people now have they're being influenced by so much more than, my generation ever has. So I'm not surprised that social anxiety or anxiety in general is on the rise. And it's a scary world.
Definitely is. It definitely is. And we're probably just scratching the surface of what the pandemic did to all of us, the impact of it. Um, yeah, it's scary to think about. But thankfully there are coaches like yourself and resources. Um, Speaking of, you wrote a book about anxiety, um, A Face of Anxiety. Can you tell us a little bit more about what we can learn from that book?
So it's funny, the book started on Instagram. So when Instagram first took off, I love anything technology based. So I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna I'm gonna build my business on Instagram. And then someone gave me an idea of writing a book. So it would just be cliff notes about basically my life and how I navigated anxiety. And it just got so much attention, and it garnered so many conversations. And I think because they were small bits, you could jump in, you could jump out. It made it easy for people to access and to kind of, take in. And then someone approached me and said, you should make it a book. And I said, well, all right. But I didn't realize that now everybody was going to read what I had to suffer with. Like I knew I was writing a book and things were public. I
Mm,
just didn't think about how public. And I had many jobs where I worked corporate America where people were just like, she's such a badass. Like they had no clue, not a clue. And then a lot of them apologized because there were dinners that I couldn't make. There were places that I would go and have to leave early because I was violently throwing up because of a panic attack. They
mm,
had no clue. They thought that I was actually being difficult, is what the feedback was. That people thought I was difficult when they didn't realize I was suffering. So the book,
mm,
yeah, it started on Instagram and then it became a book. And I would say anxiety was um, the least coached on topic before pandemic. During pandemic, it was the only thing I coached on. So people were still so a little bit timid to really go into it, because if you don't know anxiety, if you don't even know that you have it or understand it, sometimes you don't want to know.
mm. Wow, yeah, no, that's such a powerful story. Uh, at ShareWell, we're all about the power of sharing personal experiences and being able to help each other through that. In your opinion, what did you experience was the power of sharing your story? Clearly it impacted some people who were close to you. But what would you say that you ultimately feel like you gained from that experience?
Well, I gained me for myself clarity that it wasn't my fault, and it
Mm,
wasn't something that I should be ashamed of, and it wasn't something that I could fix. It was beyond that, and that took years to learn. So the goal of the book is to help, my basically my younger self to know that it was okay that you have these feelings or you might have these thoughts. You're not crazy. You're not going to be institutionalized. This is what anxiety looks like,
mm,
and it doesn't care what race, what gender, what your finances are. Like, anxiety will affect anybody and everybody. So it was, yeah, it I learned that the more real and raw than I am, and I always keep it 100 on all my platforms, um, because I think that there's just not enough of that. Everything feels very perfect, and media is so, it's like, it's your best reel out there. Like, it's the best photos, it's the best everything. And I make sure that I tell my truth always, and it helps.
mm. Thank you for that. Um, I have one more question and then we'll move to Q&A, a short one. If you could pick one thing that you love about your work, what would it be?
I I love when I hear back from somebody years later. So I've been coaching for 18 years, and there'll be people who send me messages 3 years or 5 years later, and they're like, I still use these tools. I don't know how I would have gotten through XYZ. I just sent you somebody. Like, it's powerful, right? And it did something for them and moved them, and that's the goal, right? And I get it. Coaching's not for everybody, and I'm not an easy coach. Like, I'm going to move you. That's the goal, right? And I think that the people that are ready to move, that's when they find me. So it's interesting, because I can always tell on my consult calls, like, is this person ready or not?
Mm,
Um, and just seeing people flourish and have lives, right? Because anxiety can strip you of your relationships, your job, your daily practices. I mean, it can take a lot from you. And I like that I can help people find their way back.
mm, amazing. Well, I see. Well, this is amazing. Thank you. So much knowledge on a topic that affects so many of us. Trish, such a pleasure. Thank you.
Of course. I mean, I basically do talk about this all day, but it's my wheelhouse, and I love sharing as much as I can.
Yeah, well, as you can see, the chat is blowing up with thank you. So I'm definitely not the only one that got a lot out of this session. Um, and for the rest of you, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, everyone.